All right, welcome back. Next, we're going to talk about some features that didn't exist in Bootstrap 3 at all. And they're some of my favorite additions in Bootstrap 4. I use them all the time. It's not the sexiest thing on earth, spacing utilities, but trust me, they save a lot of time and they make it really easy to add spacing, which is actually something we do pretty frequently. So on the docs, this outline of all the changes, it's really only hinted at in this section, this last line. Added dozens of new utility classes for common CSS property value pairs and margin, padding, spacing shortcuts. So if we look at what Bootstrap 3 used to include under helper classes, there's not very many. Contextual colors, we've already talked about that. Background colors. Otherwise, there's nothing around border or margin or padding. And if we look at Bootstrap 4, there's a whole utilities section and there's tons of new utilities. So colors is still here, but now there is something for display. We'll talk about that later in a different video. Position, shadows, sizing, spacing, text. And if we look at like spacing, inside of spacing, there's both margin and padding. But we're going to start with borders. So if we look at the borders utility, it's pretty straightforward. It's just an easy way of adding a border to an element. So you can give the class border. By default, it's this sort of light gray, very thin border, and it goes all the way around. You can selectively just do the top, border right, bottom, or left, and that's all you'll end up with. You can also go the other way around and subtract a border. So if you want to set border 0, like if there was a default border added from your own styles and you wanted to remove it from an element, you can do border 0. But if you have a border all the way around and you want to remove it from the top, you could do border top 0. Now this only works it will work to remove it. It doesn't matter if there was a border on the top or not, but you would only get this 3 sides, left, bottom, and right, if it already had a border all the way around and you only remove the top. So on its own, you wouldn't see a change if there wasn't already a border. Along with that, we can also change the color. So border dash primary, border secondary, success, danger, warning, and so on. And it looks like this. Now there isn't a way to easily change the thickness of the border. You can do that obviously writing your own styles, but we can change the border radius. We can make rounded corners. So add rounded and you get rounded corners on all 4. You can do rounded top, right, bottom, left to determine where you're going to have those rounded edges. And there's also rounded dash circle, which will give you a larger border radius. So let's play around with it quickly. I have a new document. It's called utilities. It's almost exactly what we've been working with. Copy and pasted from the getting started. Let me shut this down here. And I just added in a container so we have some space, and then a text-centered display 1 heading that just says utilities. So to play around with border, we should just make something to add a border to. Let's just start nice and easy with, I don't know, maybe an H5. And our H5 will just say, give me a border. And let's give it a border. And the simplest way is just border. And zoom in, it's kind of tough to see, but there is a gray border. Let's change the color to be border danger. Refresh the page, okay. And let's also change it to be rounded on the top. So rounded dash top. And refresh the page. It's going to be really tough to see. Hopefully that shows up. The top edges on the right and on the left are rounded. The bottom corners are not. Okay. So yeah, we can do this again, duplicate this one and do no rounded top. And let's do border info and let's only do border top. There we go. So this only has a light blue border on top. And just to show you the subtractive way of doing things, we can do border and then say actually border left 0 and refresh. And we get this. Let me change the color just to make it more unique. Let's do warning. And now what we end up with is a yellow border on all 4 sides except the left side. So that was a complete lie. It's on 3 sides, not all 4 sides. So top, right, and left. And yeah, that's pretty much it for the border utility. So remember that back when I talked about the page header class that no longer exists, if I can quickly find that, on Bootstrap 3, there was the page header and it said, you don't need that anymore because you can recreate it yourself. Well, to give the gray border on the bottom, that's easy now. We would just say border dash bottom. Now we'll also talk about the padding and the margin that it gives you for free, which you also can do using the other utility classes I'm going to show right now. So under spacing inside of utilities, we have margin and padding. And I'll warn you up front, there is a lot to talk about here. And I'm actually going to split it up into 2 videos. In this video, I'm going to ignore all of the responsive aspects of margin and padding. So when I say responsive aspects, for all of these classes I'm going to show you, we can add in breakpoints, small, medium, large, and extra large, to selectively apply padding and margin at different screen sizes. Maybe we want more margin on a very large screen and 0 margin on a mobile screen. We can do that. But I'm ignoring that part for now. I'm going to come back to it because it's very, very useful. It's just a lot to talk about. So here's what you need to know, ignoring the responsive aspects. There are 2 letters we can use, M for margin, P for padding. Let's focus on padding first. So all the classes that have to do with padding start with P, and then we have to say where the padding goes. Do we want it just on top, which is a T, on the bottom, on the left, on the right? But there's also X and Y. So X does padding left and right, and Y does padding top and bottom. Or we could leave it blank and just say P, and that will set it all the way around, by default all 4 sides. And then we have 5 different values, actually 6 different values, including 0. So 0 up until 5 for the amount of padding or the amount of margin. So if we said PT0, that would be padding top 0. If we said PL5, that would be padding left 5. So I'm going to show you some examples to make this clearer. But those are the different pieces we need. So are we doing margin or padding? Where is it going? Top, bottom, left and right, top and bottom, or everywhere, all sides. And then how much? And we'll come back to what 1 actually means, what 5 means. Just know that 0 means 0 margin or padding, and 5 means the most. Okay, so let's play around with it. I'm going to add some buttons in here, and each one I'm going to make a BTN, let's do info. And this first one is going to be padding 0. So P0 is, right now it has no padding. Oops, I need BTN dash info. Okay, so this is the default button, what it looks like. But if I do P-0 as a class, this says remove all padding from all sides. So now we have no padding around this button. Now I'm going to duplicate this and do all the other levels. So I'll fast forward. There we go. So I just updated P1, P2, P5, and so on. And here's what we get. So this one has 0 padding. This button has 1 padding. This has 2, this has 3, this has 4, and this has 5. Now those numbers don't actually mean we're setting this to be padding of 5 pixels or some version of 5. These are just different levels. And it's all based off of rems, root M's. And if we inspect this, let me make this full screen and inspect one of these. Let's take a look at 5, P5. You'll see that its padding is actually set to 3 rems. And if we take a look at P4, it's set to 1.5. And 0 is going to be set to 0 root M's. So the explanation for this is kind of convoluted. Basically, in the source code of Bootstrap, there's something called spacer. And by default, it is set to 1. So it's a multiplier. And if you change that spacer value, it's going to change how much spacing, how much padding and margin is added here. But by default, these are the values. So if you set P0, it's going to be 0 padding. If you do P1, it's 0.25 rems. If you do P2, it's 0.5 rems, all the way up to 5, which is going to be 3 rems. We don't have to care so much about it. I usually just play around and tweak, see if I like P4 versus P3 based off of just visually what looks better. I never am like, oh, I need exactly 1.5 rems. You just play around with it. Okay, so let's play around with the top and bottom aspects now. So I'm going to move this over, top and bottom, left and right, I should clarify. So to do that, I'm going to make a couple more. And this first one, I'm going to do padding top of 5. So PT-5. And that's what we end up with. It's this one right here. So it's only on top. We're adding that 5 padding, which is actually 3 rems, but that doesn't matter. We can do the same thing, padding bottom 5. we'll give it the class of pb-5. And now all that padding is added to the bottom. We also have padding y of 5, which is going to give us top and bottom, but not left and right. And I'll fast forward and do the same thing for left, right, and x, which is left and right together. Okay, so this one has padding left of 5, this one has padding right of 5, and this one has padding x of 5, which is left and right. So that's it for the padding utilities. Of course, we could do different numbers. You could do padding y of 2, or padding y of 0 will remove all padding from the top and bottom. But I'm going to leave it at this. These are the padding utilities. Now I'm going to show you margin, which works in the same way, except you're changing the margin. So the only difference is M rather than P. So I'll do a couple of paragraphs, and I'm going to give them each a background of, let's do background success. And why not text white, just to use some of those classes. And I'll just say I am, and this first one is going to be margin 0. So I'm actually going to make a couple of these that have m-0. So that just sets margin 0 everywhere. Duplicate it, refresh the page. All right, so now we have a bunch of these paragraphs with no margin anywhere. But now I'm going to make this first one margin 1. So m-1 will give margin all the way around, left, right, top, and bottom, assuming I save. So you can see there's a little margin on top and left and bottom and on the right. All right, so I'm going to just go through and add it for the rest. There we go. So this has margin 2, margin 3, margin 4, and margin 5 all the way around. And it's the same values using rems. Okay, as padding, that is. So of course, we can do the exact same thing with the location of the margin, top, bottom, left, and right, which is Y, or excuse me, top and bottom, which is Y, left and right, and X, which is both left and right together. So we can do that with margin. It's the same thing. We just do MR-3, which would add to the margin right. Okay, so there's a lot to the syntax here, but hopefully you can see the pattern that it follows. You select padding or margin. You select an optional location, so you can leave it off and just do padding everywhere or padding left. And then a number value from 0 to 5. 0 will remove the margin or padding. 5 will add the most possible, not the most possible on Earth, but the most possible on the scale that we're given from Bootstrap. All right.